Alright, so in this video here we're going to look at creating a frequency distribution table using Excel. And what we're going to do here is, with this frequency distribution table, of course we'll find the intervals here that we need, and then we'll find the frequency, the number of data values in each interval, the midpoint of each interval, the class boundaries, the relative frequency, and the cumulative frequency. Alright, so to do this we're going to need to find this stuff here, the number of classes, the class width, the minimum value of the data set, the maximum value of the data set, and how many data values we have. Alright, and I'll explain this 2 raised to the k in a little bit. Alright, so the first thing we want to do is let's go ahead and find these values, this minimum, maximum, and number of data. Alright, so to find the minimum, we'll use a formula here, equals min. That's going to give us the minimum value. And we have to select our data range, which starts here at A2. And it goes down to row 165, and I'll close my parentheses and hit enter. Alright, and as you can see, the minimum value is 22, and you can see that our data ranges from cell A2 to A165. Okay, so that'll make it a little bit easier. We won't have to come over here and select the data to do our maximum. So for the maximum, we'll put equals max and then parentheses, and then we're going to do cells A2 and then put a colon to A165 and close our parentheses and hit enter. And the maximum data value is 80. Now we need to know how many data values we have. So we're going to use the count function for that. So I'll hit equals count. And you can see the count function, it counts the number of cells in a range that contain numbers. So for this, when I hit my parenthesis, I can just select column A, because it won't count this cell here, this ages, because it's not a number. And then I'll close my parentheses and hit enter. So I have 164 data values. Alright, so now let's see how many classes we need, the number of classes. So a lot of times in the textbooks they're gonna give you how many classes to use. But you know, if they don't tell you how many classes to use, one way that we can figure it out is use this 2 raised to the k, where k represents the number of classes you are using. Alright, so what we're going to do here is we're going to put a formula 2, so we hit equals and then 2 raised, so that's the shift and then the 6, and then we want to raise it to the number of classes. K represents the number of classes you're using, and we hit enter, and it's going to give us a 1 there because it's looking at this as being 0, and so 2 to the 0 would be 1. Now the rule that we go by is this value here needs to be greater than or equal to the number of data values we have. So I need the number of classes, so 2 raised to the number of classes needs to be equal to or larger than 164. So we can put a 6 in here, and when we hit enter you can see that's 64, so that's not enough. So maybe we'll go up to 8, and that's 256, that's larger than 164, and so it looks like we're going to use 8 classes. Alright, so now let's look at our class width. So to find the class width, that's the maximum data value minus the minimum data value divided by the number of classes. So for that formula, we'll type equals, and then when we do the maximum value minus the minimum value, that's going to need to be in parentheses. So it's going to be the maximum data value minus our minimum data value. So we'll click on this cell. Okay, so that's D6 minus D5, which is the maximum minus the minimum. And then close the parentheses. And then that's going to be divided by the number of classes. So I'm going to divide by this cell here that represents the number of classes. So I'll click on that and I hit enter. And so that gives me 7.5. Alright, so what we do here is the class width. Okay, whatever number you get, you want to round up to the next integer. So we got 7.25 here, so that means we need 8 classes. And if we would have gotten 7, then we would still round up to 8. Alright, so what we want to do here is we can add to this formula. So what we can do is we can click in here and we can put round. Now they have a round down and a round up function. It may make sense to use the round up function, but we want to use the round down. If we use the round up function, if for some reason when we calculate the class width and it comes out to be, say, exactly 7, then when the round up function will leave it at 7. It won't round it up to an 8. So what I want to do is I want to use the round down function. Okay, and then I'll put my parentheses, and I want to leave this formula, and then I'm going to put a comma, and I put a 0 because I don't want any decimals. Okay, and then I'll close my parentheses, and then I need to add 1, because what it's going to do, that 7.25 we got, it's going to round it down to 7, and then adding the 1 will bump it up to 8. Alright, and the other reason we want to use the round down is because let's suppose this came out to be exactly 7. Okay, well the round down would leave it at 7, but see, then I'm adding 1 to it, so that's going to bump it up to 8. Alright, so now let's set up the intervals. Alright, so the intervals, the lower limit of my first class, okay, that's going to be the minimum value of the data set, so that's going to be 22. Alright, and now what I need to do is the class width is 8, so you might think that this needs to be, that this upper limit on this interval needs to be 30, but that's not the case. The class width is added to the lower class limit, and then you add the 8 to it, and that gives you the lower limit of the next class. Okay, and so there's the 30. And now what I can do, instead of, just figuring it up, adding, I can highlight these two, and I can grab right here. You see how it changes? Alright, I can grab that and drag down. So I left click, and I have 2 classes right there. And so I drag down, there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And it automatically adds 8 each time. And so that means the upper limit of the first class would need to be 29, 1 less than this. Okay, and this one would need to be 37, 1 less than the 38. And then I can highlight, click on the corner of the cell here, and drag down. Alright, so there's my intervals. Okay, here's my intervals for my 8 classes. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 classes. Now we need the frequency. We need to know how many values are in each interval. Alright, so I'm going to use the frequency function here. So I'll come up here and hit this insert function, okay, and you can go here to all and just click on the first one and just type in FR, and it'll automatically take you down there to the F's, and in this case it takes us to the frequency. So I'll hit OK. Alright, now I need my data array. That's our data values, so I'll click this and that collapses the dialog box, and I'm going to select all my data, and you could type, went a little too far, you could type it in A2 to A165, and then I'll expand it back. Now let's go up here for the bins array. So the bins array, oh, I'm sorry, I messed up. Now notice what I did. I just clicked on this first cell here. That would not have done anything with the frequency function. To do the frequency function, it's an array function, so I need to highlight all the cells where I want my frequencies. So that's going to be from the first class to the last class. Alright, so now let's go back to the frequency function. So I'll type in the FR, hit OK. Let's collapse this, select our data just like we did before. Alright, so there's all our values. And then I'll expand it back. And let's scroll back up to the top. And now my bins array. So the bins array, alright, so that is just selecting the upper limits. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first upper limit, the upper limit of the first class, and I'm going to highlight all the way down to the second to the last class. I don't select this one, okay, because what it does is with this formula, it's going to tell me all the numbers between or less than 29, okay, but I know the lowest one is 22, so that's going to be everything from 22 to 29. And then by selecting the 37, that's everything from 30 to 37, and so on. And for this one, leaving this blank, see, since this cell is highlighted, it's going to tell me everything greater than 77. Alright, so let's expand it back. Now, to enter this formula, you can't hit OK or enter. This is an array function. So you have to hit Control Shift Enter. And there it gives me the frequencies. Alright, so now we have our frequencies. And now I need the midpoint of each interval. Okay, the midpoint. So the midpoint, that's going to equal, and that's just the lower limit plus the upper limit divided by 2. So when I add the lower and upper limit of the class, I need to put that in parentheses, so that's going to equal, and then it's the lower limit of the interval plus the upper limit of the interval, parentheses, and that's going to be divided by 2, and I hit enter. So there's my midpoint. Now instead of entering that formula in every time, all I have to do is come up here, select the cell that has the formula, and then copy it down. And one way I can do that, watch how the plus changes. You see when I grab that corner, the right hand corner, with my mouse on that, all I have to do is double click it, and it automatically copies the formula down. Alright, now let's look at the class boundaries. Alright, so the class boundaries, I have a lower limit and an upper limit for the class boundaries. Okay, so the lower limit of the class boundary is the lower limit of this class minus 0.5. And the upper limit of the class boundary is the upper limit of this class plus 0.5. So I'll hit equals, and then this lower limit plus 0.5. And I hit enter. I'm sorry, not plus. Let's go up here and change that to minus 0.5. Enter. And then the upper limit on the class boundary is equal to the upper limit of the class plus 0.5, and hit enter. Alright, so that's what I want for all of these. So I can select both cells. Okay, I have them in two different cells, and then I'll grab that right corner again, left click, hold the left mouse button down, and drag, and that gives me my upper and lower limits of my class boundaries. Alright, now the next, relative frequency and cumulative frequency. Alright, so you can see that we can't really read these very good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight this, and I'm going to wrap the text. So this right here on the home screen, I can click this button here and I can wrap text, and so now you can see that we can read it better. Alright, so the relative frequency, okay, what's the relative frequency? Well, it's the frequency of that class divided by the total number of data values. And you can see I have the total number of data values here. Alright, so I'm going to hit equals, okay, and it's going to be this value divided by this total 164. Now, if I copy this down, it's going to change the 7 for, well, let me just show you. Okay, so if I drag down and copy, look what it does. It says this division by 0. So if you look, you see here I have divided by D7, which is this cell here. Okay, but look at this one. It says divided by D8. It adjusts the rows as I copy it down, and that's not what I want. So what we're going to do there is we'll need to go to this cell here where the formula is, and we want the denominator, this D7, we want that to stay there. So I'll click here and I'll put the $sign in front of the D, and I can put a $sign in front of the 7. And what that'll do is it'll keep it from changing. Alright, so now we go back up here, drag down, and there's our relative frequency column. Alright, now for the cumulative frequency column. Okay, so the cumulative frequency, okay, so for the first one, that's just going to be the 16. For the second one, that's going to be 31 plus 16. And for the next one, that's going to be 51 plus 31 plus 16. And then the 25 plus 51 plus 31 plus 16, and so on. So a formula that we can use there is we can use the sum function. So I'm going to hit equals sum, okay, and I'm going to sum this cell here, okay, and then colon to G2. I'm going to click on that cell again, alright, and that gives me the 16. Alright, so what I want to do is when I copy this down, let's see what happens when we copy it down. Okay, see it changes that G3 to G3, G4 to G4, but that's not what we need. We need it to go from here G2 to G2. Here we need it to sum G2 and G3, G2, G3, and G4. So I need this one to stay at G2. So I'll put my $sign, and a $sign, and then this second one here, I want that to change. So I'm going to leave it alone. So let's hit enter, and then I click on the cell, grab the right corner, and drag down. And you can see it totals them up like it's supposed to. Alright, so there's our frequency distribution table, and you can come on here and you can add borders and stuff like that. So what I'm going to do in some other videos is I'm going to use this data here, and I'm going to create a histogram. We'll create a relative frequency histogram, an ogive, that's with the cumulative frequencies, and we'll create a stem and leaf plot with this data, and a box and whisker plot with this data. And I'll do that in some separate videos, and you can check the description, and I'll have the links to those videos in the description of this one. Alright, so I hope this video helped. If you like it, you can check out my other videos. Alright, thanks.